carnally, earth.
It was January 18th in the year 1778 that the English explorer Captain James Cook becomes the first European to travel to the Hawaiian Islands when he sails past the island of Oahu. 2 days later, he landed at Waimea on the island of Kauai and named the island group the Sandwich Islands in honor of John Montagu, who was the Earl of Sandwich and one of his patrons. In 1768, Cook, a surveyor in the Royal Navy, was commissioned a lieutenant in command of the HMS Endeavour and led an expedition that took scientists to Tahiti to chart the course of the planet Venus. In 1771, he returned to England, having explored the coast of New Zealand and Australia and circumnavigated the globe. Beginning in 1772, he commanded a major mission to the South Pacific, and during the next 3 years explored the Antarctic region. He also charted the New Hebrides and discovered New Caledonia. In 1776, he sailed from England again as commander of the HMS Resolution and Discovery, and in 1778 made his first visit to the Hawaiian Islands. James Cook and his crew were welcomed by the Hawaiians, who were fascinated by European ships and their use of iron. Cook provisioned his ships by trading the metal, and his sailors traded iron nails for sex. The ships then made a brief stop at Niihau and headed north to look for the western end of a northwest passage from the North Atlantic to the Pacific. Almost 1 year later, Cook's 2 ships returned to the Hawaiian Islands and found a safe harbor in Hawaii's Kealakekua Bay. It is suspected that the Hawaiians attached religious significance to the first stay of the Europeans on their islands. In Cook's second visit, there was no question of this phenomenon. Kealakekua Bay was considered the sacred harbor of Lono, the fertility god of the Hawaiians. And at the time of Cook's arrival, the locals were engaged in a festival dedicated to Lono. Cook and his compatriots were welcomed as gods, and for the next month exploited the Hawaiians' goodwill. After one of the crew members continued their eternity, exposing the Europeans as mere mortals, relations became strained. On February 4th in 1779, the British ships sailed from Kealakekua Bay, but rough seas damaged the foremast of the Resolution, and after only a week at sea, the expedition was forced to return to Hawaii. The Hawaiians greeted Cook and his men by hurling rocks. They then stole a small cutter vessel from the Discovery. Negotiations with King Kalaniʻapu for the return of the cutter collapsed after a lesser Hawaiian chief was shot and continued their eternity, and a mob of Hawaiians descended on Cook's party. The captain and his men fired on the angry Hawaiians, but they were soon overwhelmed, and only a few managed to escape to the safety of the Resolution. Captain Cook himself continued his eternity as a result of the attack by the mob. A few days later, the Englishmen retaliated by firing their cannons and muskets at the shore. 30 Hawaiians continued their eternity as a result. The Resolution and Discovery eventually returned to England. It was January 18th in the year 1803 that Thomas Jefferson requested funding from Congress to finance the Lewis and Clark expeditions. Jefferson officially asked for $2,500 in funding from Congress, though some sources indicate the expedition ultimately cost closer to $50,000. Meriwether Lewis was joined by his friend William Clark and 50 others on the journey, including an enslaved African American and a female Native American guide named Sacagawea. The team, which Jefferson called the Corps of Discovery, first surveyed the territory that comprised the Louisiana Purchase, a vast expanse that reached as far north as present-day North Dakota, south to the Gulf of Mexico, and stopped at the eastern border of the Spanish territory in present-day Texas. The team then crossed the Rockies and navigated river routes to the Pacific coast of present-day Oregon. Upon their return, the duo's reports of the exotic and awe-inspiring new lands they had encountered sparked a new wave of westward expansion. Thomas Jefferson, our nation's third president, first proposed the exploratory expedition even before Napoleon offered to sell France's American territory to our great nation. Now, that sale, of course, was known as the Louisiana Purchase. At the time, Thomas Jefferson had no authorization from Congress to launch a survey of the area when news of Napoleon's offer to sell reached Washington. In the end, Napoleon abandoned his plans to establish a French foothold on America's southern flank and sold the land to the U.S. to subsidize his conquest of Europe. Though he did not disclose his intentions to Congress, Jefferson planned to send Meriwether Lewis, his private secretary, on a reconnaissance mission that far exceeded the boundaries of the Louisiana Purchase to determine how far west the U.S. might extend commerce in the North American fur trade and to assess the viability of future territorial expansion into the West. In misleading Congress, Jefferson had temporarily stifled his distaste for an abuse of executive privilege to achieve a strategic goal. A product of the Enlightenment, Jefferson was a man with strong political principles, but he was also fascinated by what the expedition might yield in terms of scientific discovery and adventure. Jefferson sought to claim more territory for the U.S., eliminate foreign competition, and convert the Indian nations to Christianity, viewing westward expansion as a way for the nation to maintain its agrarian values and to ward off the same political perils that plagued what he saw as an increasingly overcrowded Europe. It was on January 18th in the year 1950 that the People's Republic of China formally recognized the Communist Democratic Republic of Vietnam and agrees to furnish it military assistance. The Soviet Union extended diplomatic recognition to Hanoi on January 30th. China and the Soviet Union provided massive military and economic aid to North Vietnam, which enabled North Vietnam to fight first the French and then us. Chinese aid to North Vietnam between 1950 and 1970 is estimated at $20 billion. It is thought that China provided approximately 3/4 of the total military aid given to Hanoi since 1949, with the Soviets providing most of the rest. It would have been impossible for the North Vietnamese to continue the Vietnam War without the aid from both the Chinese and the Soviets.